Good morning. This is Saturday, June the 30th. This is Ron. Welcome to Story Time. Thank you very much. And this is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, and speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. One of the things I wanted to address today, or the thing I wanted to address in my monologue, was about liberals on the liberals are much more effective, or I should say, socialists. The last liberal was probably Thomas Jefferson. But anyways, socialists are more effective in the private sector, oddly enough, than they are in politics. If you have somebody that's a socialist, for instance, the lady that just won an election in New York, people can keep an eye on her. Okay, they can monitor her votes. And pretty much everything and anything she does is public. So she starts to do something outrageous, the alarm can be sounded, etc. In private world, the left's presence is more clandestine. A lot of subterfuge and a lot of trickery going on. One of the favorite techniques of the left is to sue a large company for something, and maybe the ACLU will sue them, and then go ahead and they get a settlement, and they want to get the settlement so as to because they can ask for anything. And so what they can very often do is that the socialists say, okay, we'll settle this case, but we want one of our people, i.e., a socialist, on your board of directors. That's the condition for the settlement, or part of the condition. Pay the court costs, the attorney's fees, and put one of our people, person of our choosing, on the board of directors. And I believe that they have and do that and have done it. Exactly on which companies, I don't know. But that way, then they're going to be every time they get one socialist can get another socialist, and pretty soon you might have a situation where the majority of the board of directors are socialist, and they can end up, let's say, with the case of the oil companies, if they want to, they can ruin the company from the inside out just by having a bunch of corrupt people on the board of directors and that are going to steer the company down the drain, so to speak. Um, that is always something to keep an eye on. When you hear that a company is being sued and then they settle a suit, and especially if there are some or all of the details of that settlement are sealed so that people can't see it, there might be something, some kind of shenanigan like that going on. What reminded me of this was, again, Starbucks. And there's another company as well that apparently I was reading about they're dealing with a particular problem in the case of Starbucks where they had these individuals that were arrested by the police. They were loitering on Starbucks property, and it created a big public relations difficulty, if not nightmare, for Starbucks. Um, it seems to me also that Starbucks and some of the other companies have the other way that lefties, let's put it this way, can get on boards of directors and influence companies and therefore influence the economy and have also a bigger influence over people's lives than if you had them in politics, because you can't see them. They're in private life. They have an expectation of privacy. So it's much more difficult to find out who they are and what they're up to than you can in the public sector. Um, in the case of, let's say, Starbucks, and I may have covered this before, where if you're starting a company and you go for venture capital, okay, because that's one of the ways of getting funding. If you're starting a company and you plan to be big, you plan to be national, international, you're going to need a lot of capital. You're going to have building to headquarters, and you're going to have officers to pay and all that stuff. So you need a lot of money to get started. And so again, especially with the venture capitalists, they want to keep an eye on their investment. So very frequently what the venture capitalists will do is say, sure, we'll give you the money, but we have to pick the officers in your company. So there was a couple, a man and a woman, husband and wife, that started Cisco. Cisco systems were the ones that actually started getting the internet together. They were the ones that actually were laying the cords, so to speak, getting people, everybody connected. If you don't get people connected, there is no internet. And they were the ones that started getting people connected and getting people hooked up to the internet. They had a company and they had this idea, and so they needed, again, it was expanding, and they needed venture capital. And so the venture capitalists told them that yes, we'll give you the money, but we got to pick your officers. So uh, the two remained like as CEO and COO or something. They were the head of the company, but it was the venture capital group that had picked their vice presidents. So what ended up happening is that the vice presidents at some point went to the venture capitalists and said, "These people are crap. These two, the man and wife, the husband and wife, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to run a company. Blah blah. If you don't do something about it, we're going to quit." In other words, all of the vice presidents would hit the bricks. The venture capitalists then basically what they did is they bought off the husband and wife, forced them out, but bought them off. They got tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. Of course, the company went on later to be worth billions or tens of billions of dollars. So there's some people that say that the couple got the short end of the stick on this particular arrangement. But the point is that you've got to do, if you're setting up a company, you're in the similar position. Beware of venture capitalists and their, saying to you, okay, we will go ahead and give you the money, except we'll have to appoint the officers of your company. Beware of that. You might want to say, you know what, skip it. Maybe you want to go ahead and expand or grow slower. Because, I mean, venture capital will make it easier for you to grow quickly. But maybe it's a better idea to forego that kind of trade-off. Forego the venture capital and go ahead and get and just grow a little bit slower. Pick your own people, and that way you have some loyalty, and it's going to make a huge difference down the line. Because again, if you have a situation where something comes up, particularly something socio-political, and the venture capitalists could load your company up with socialists, and you decide that you want your company to be pro Second Amendment. Well, if all your officers threaten to resign over some pro Second Amendment statement, now you're in an awkward position. So again, it's another way for socialists to use power, and it's a more subtle and nuanced way for them to go about it. Another way, again, is, but it's government post, but when you look at horse racing, California has a California Horse Racing Board, and they oversee horse racing and the rules and whatnot and fees and et cetera. So if you're a PETA person, and one of the PETA's goals is to get rid of any type of using animals for anything. Okay, animals they feel should just be left alone unmolested. So using them to wager on, they absolutely can't stand. They want to get rid of horse racing. So they can either do that by direct confrontation, direct action, running out in the street with signs and placards and complaining and exhorting people to stay away from the horse races. Or another way they could do it is a little bit more subtle, and that is get their people placed on the California Horse Racing Board. And if you get enough of them on there, then they can make rules that basically lead to the destruction of horse racing in the state of California. And all you have to do is set up rules so that make it more difficult for the better. Okay, and eventually what happens is the bettors go somewhere else. Instead of betting horse racing in California, maybe they'll go to a casino and play poker, something like that. And then gradually, slowly but surely, the horse racing industry falls into decline, eventually goes away, and then the people, PETA and whatnot, can show clean hands. Hey, we didn't do it. It just it withered and died because nobody was interested. Nobody really wants to watch horses racing, and so it died of its own accord. It died because of market forces. So that's a delicious irony, a lie, but also a delicious irony for the left. And the left loves their irony. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Imprimis, December 2014, Volume 43, Number 12, Wave Elections, What They Mean. Okay, thank you very much. And yes, this is going to be Wave Elections, What They Mean by Larry P. Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. We have had a wave election. For those of a conservative disposition, it is a satisfying wave. According to Michael Barone, speaking recently here at Hillsdale's Kirby Center, this wave is like several recent wave elections in its magnitude and decisiveness. There was a wave in favor of the Republicans in 1980 and again in 1994. There was a wave in favor of the Democrats in 2006 and again in 2008. There was a wave for the Republicans in 2010, a stalemate in 2012, and a Republican wave in 2014. Looked at one way, these waves appear more like tides, ebbing and flowing. These waves have something to do with a change in opinion over the last 50 years. Increasingly large majorities of people consistently profess themselves afraid of their government. They think it too big. They think it does not account to them, that it is beyond their control and does not operate with their consent. They think it should be smaller, even if that means they receive fewer services. It seems that the growth of government has not made people feel safe and happy. Nonetheless, two of the recent waves elected people who support larger government, and Americans continue to depend on government more than ever. At all levels, government consumes something close to 40% of the economy, not even counting regulatory costs, which are nearing $2 trillion. People seem to be groping for a solution to this, and they do not seem to think they have found it. This picture is not unprecedented. In the period leading up to the American Revolution, loyalists, or Tories, contested with revolutionaries, and these two groups alternated having the upper hand between 1763 and 1776, and even later after the war had begun. The people were making up their minds about something fundamental, and a consensus was slow in forming. In the period before the Civil War, there were those who advocated destroying slavery in the slave states, where the national government's constitutional authority to do so was weak or non-existent. There were others who supported slavery where it existed, and even the extension of slavery into new regions. Others still would find some compromise that would do the least dramatic possible thing. And then there was the new Republican Party, founded to stop slavery's expansion and seek a constitutional path to its eventual abolition. This, too, is a fundamental question, and it took a long time and eventually much blood to decide it. This controversy over slavery grew up in the course of one generation. One may mark it by two of the most important statutes in American history, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Northwest Ordinance brought the territory that became Michigan and other states into the Union, and it was the first time that a government like ours being the first such government, had grown. It did not choose to grow by establishing colonies, but rather by treating the citizens of a new region as full citizens as quickly as they could get organized. The Northwest Territory had belonged to Virginia, and Virginia, a slave state, on the motion of Thomas Jefferson, a slaveholder, gave the land to the Union for free on condition only that there be no slavery allowed in it at any time. Although Virginia also insisted on a provision to return escaped slaves from Virginia back to their servitude, the document must be read as a sign of consensus about slavery. We have it, those early Americans said, and we do not know what to do about it. But we know that it is wrong and should not be extended elsewhere. Many in the founding generation stated this, often in beautiful terms. And 8 states either abolished slavery or set up laws for gradual emancipation relatively quickly after the Revolution. A generation later, Missouri was to come into the Union, and the Senate was evenly balanced between slave and free states. A compromise was necessary because the slave states insisted upon keeping that balance by admitting as many slave states as free states. Not long after that, agitation began to extend slavery even further into the vast territories still not incorporated as states. At the same time, the argument began to appear that slavery was in fact a good thing, based on the idea that some human beings had evolved to a state of superiority over others. The principle that all men are created equal, the very basis of American liberty in the Declaration of Independence, was condemned by a U.S. Senator from Indiana as a self-evident lie. This dispute had something in common with the dispute with the king during the Revolution. In 1776, the king had a message from the throne distributed across the lines in Boston to the American army. He was confident that this would make them abandon the cause of revolution. He made the argument that he was born to be king by divine right, that his children must obey him for the same reasons he, occupying a station of nobility, was obliged to care for them. The Declaration of Independence had said that no one may be rightly governed except by his consent because all men are created equal. The king understood his position to be built upon the opposite notion, but the American troops besieging Boston, whose enlistments were soon to expire, re-enlisted in vast numbers in rejection of the king and in support of the Declaration. Soon enough, the whole country followed. Our times are like these previous times in terms of the alternation and number of political waves. But is there a principle at stake today that is as deep as the one that divided the nation in those two fateful periods? The left and some in the right in both political parties in America have styled themselves progressive for more than 100 years. Progress to them is a process of history. In that process, people and peoples are transformed and can be elevated. Time and circumstance define the being of man and of everything else. This process of social evolution makes our grandest universal statements in any time not really universal, but merely products of their own time. When the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, it understands itself to be asserting an abiding and universal fact. When it appeals to the laws of nature and of nature's God, it refers to the laws above the authority of man and continuing without fail through all time and everywhere. Progressives understand such laws as only time-bound assertions, the product of prevailing circumstances. Early progressives were fond of saying that those universal assertions were good things for their time, and history was made better for them, even though they were wrong at the time in their claims of being universal. They can have permanence by this way of thinking only if they can assume new meanings as new circumstances arise. For progressives, we discover the real truth about these matters by a certain kind of scientific inquiry, an inquiry into history, and once we begin that inquiry, it becomes sovereign. If everything is to change, and we are simply creatures of that change, we can win our freedom by taking control of the process of change. Guided by highly trained people, scientists, and social scientists, we can direct the society to become a new society, its people a new people. The work of these scientific people is very important, perhaps even sovereign. They have a standing independent of the will of the governed, previously thought self-governing by nature. These scientists are the makers of the future, and in making the future, the people are the subject of their experiments. Since the wave election last month, we have been treated to videos of Professor John Gruber, an MIT social scientist. He's been dining out since 2010 on his experience as one of the architects of Obamacare. He was paid, at last count, $400,000 by the federal government and something over $1.5 million by several state governments in aggregate to practice his architecture. Now he's on video telling the story. The architects of Obamacare figured out that if they described the health care law as it was, the American people would not go for it. They are, quote, stupid, unquote, in Professor Gruber's estimation. They are stupid, at least in this respect. If the complex bill could be called something other than it was, then the bill could pass and people could be introduced to its wonders. They would be able to enjoy those wonders only through experience, as they lack the intelligence to figure it out in advance. Dr. Gruber apologized when the initial video appeared, but since then several other videos have surfaced that show him saying the same thing on other occasions. This means that Conversations like the one he describes were going on among many people, apparently one of them in the White House with President Obama at the time of the bill's passage. And the videos of his speeches mean that there are many people, generally highly educated people, who enjoy stories like this, pay Mr. Gruber when he tells them, and respect him for his achievement. To these people, the passage of Obamacare is apparently a delightful episode in American history. Nor is this an isolated achievement. The Dodd-Frank law sets up a power in the federal government to investigate anyone and everyone who lends money to any consumer. The agency that performs those investigations gets its budget directly from the Federal Reserve, and the Congress is forbidden by its own statute, signed by the President, to inquire into the agency's budget. This is a perfect example of a violation of separation of powers that the Constitution was written to prevent. There are many others. Now the President has legalized the residence here of several million people who have entered the nation illegally. Immigration and illegal immigration are, of course, tangled and difficult issues. There are so many illegals, and many of them have been here for a long time. Many of them have children, and the children are citizens under the current reading of the Constitution. There have been others. The President himself spoke about amnesty by executive order to a Hispanic group called La Raza, which means the race. Saluting by race and categorizing by race have reached epidemic proportions in our country. Obama was pressed by La Raza, as he has been by many others, to provide amnesty in his authority alone. He replied in his La Raza speech, "I swore an oath to uphold the laws on the books. Believe me," he continued, "the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting. But that's not how our system works. That's not how our democracy functions. That's not how our Constitution is written." Now he has changed his mind, however, and has done what the Constitution, by his previous admission, prohibits. There are many reasons why one must sympathize with illegal immigrants and their children. There are many reasons to rue the generation or two of bad policy that has admitted them here, designed and implemented by people who simultaneously failed to make the case for a wide immigration policy, legally sanctioned, that pays attention to ability to work and emphasizes the practices and beliefs that constitute the United States. But now that we have this situation, it must be resolved by constitutional processes. These are specifically contrived to include everyone in the debate and to make decisions over time, not suddenly and not partially. To circumvent those, which by his own words President Obama has said executive amnesty would do, is to circumvent the only system of self-government that we have. Of course, there is a partisan aspect to all of this for both political parties. The president appeared at a gathering of La Raza because he was courting the votes of Hispanics, who are growing in number and who vote more heavily for his party than the other. There's a well-developed and heavily funded strategy to win a majority based in part upon this fact. That means that the president has an interest in amnesty, and so does his party. This fact reminds one of the actions of the British king cited in the Declaration of Independence to expand the territory of the British government in Quebec in 1774 and to give that government more control over territory previously associated with the American colonies. He gave it control of much of the Northwest Territory, eventually the subject of the Northwest Ordinance. The king was picking the constituency that he wanted, and by this means our founders thought he was circumventing the will of the people. These issues are of concern to Hillsdale College for several reasons. There is the fact that we were founded as every old liberal arts college was founded, to study the nature of man, his place in the order of creation, and his relationship to God and to the other creatures. It was organized to find the good of each kind of being, especially the human being. This work, much more than any contemporary political question, is the heart of the work of the college and its main substance. Because of this work, the college was founded in loyalty to the principles and institutions of this country. Its oldest building was dedicated on the 4th of July, and this is one of the many testimonies to this loyalty, some of them written in blood. America's founders believed, and the founders of our college agreed, that the regime of freedom was the best to protect the ability of each to seek his virtues, moral and intellectual, and especially wisdom and the knowledge of God. These activities cannot be commanded in detail from above. Another reason we care about these matters is because we wish to continue, as we have always done, according to the mission explained in our founding document. We wish to continue to teach the moral and intellectual virtues, which include the personal, the family, and the civic virtues, and which include the pursuit of prudence and wisdom. We wish to continue to teach that the family established in nature and established in the same way in faith is the best way to raise children, and the raising of children is necessary to the well being of everyone in every generation, young, middle aged, and old. And if the current political trends continue of replacing constitutional processes, and self government with administrative or bureaucratic command and control, the activities that we have continued to pursue here for 170 years will be endangered. We look back through the past and through the great books, old and new, and wonder what solution can be found to this crisis. It turns out that there are examples both of thinking and of acting that can help guide us. We require today a devotion to two things that are on the surface contrary. The first of them is constitutionalism, and the second is statesmanship. It is obvious why these do not seem to go together. The work of statesmen is only a sharp example of something we must all do daily. We hold convictions that are elevated above practical circumstances, but we must apply those convictions amidst the pressures of the day. We compromise all the time. Shall we see our child's basketball game, or shall we go to the meeting at work? Is it necessary to spend time with one's children? It is necessary to spend time with one's children, and it is necessary to earn and provide for them. Our ends come into conflict all the time. Statesmen are people usually adept at finding ways to get the best and avoid the worst, and constantly they adapt and compromise. Constitutions, on the other hand, are grand laws written a long time ago. They get in the way all the time, and statesmen constantly have reasons to be impatient with them. Any list of the most influential heads of state in the 20th century has to include the names of Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini. They're not famous for their constitutionalism, but for being tyrants. The greatest opposite example in the 20th century is found in the remarkable career of Winston Churchill, which I've been privileged to study. The British Constitution, and for that matter the American, are among his favorite themes. He served them faithfully through his more than 50 years of active political life, through war such as has never been seen, and also through unprecedented economic depression. These two solutions, constitutionalism and statesmanship, come together then in the careers of certain remarkable people. On the one hand, they are good at getting power, and on the other hand, they are quick to give it back and to set examples that serve to distribute power long after them. One need think only of George Washington and his repeated resignations from office, just at the moment when he had gained such credibility that some called for him to become king. If you want to see a contemporary example, watch the victory speech of the newly elected U.S. Senator from my home state of Arkansas, who spoke of the need to find ways for our government to address many problems, including those of the poor and the weak, while still running the government under the Constitution so that the people can control it and not it, the people. Although we have plenty to worry about in the management of the college that stems from these great trends, still we see reason to hope for more waves in the direction of the Constitution. Our crisis may be grave and threatening, and yet it cannot be worse than others we have survived in the past. Those others can supply a guide to us today. And just like the pursuit of wisdom, so the life under free and constitutional rule is a beautiful life, and it sings to the heart of every man and woman. And that was the article, Wave Elections and What They Mean, by Larry P. Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, adapted from a speech delivered on December 5, 2014, at Hillsdale College's Alan P. Kirby Jr. Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship in Washington, D.C. Larry P. Arnn is the 12th president of Hillsdale College. He received his BA from Arkansas State University and his MA and PhD in government from the Claremont Graduate School. From 1977 to 1980, he also studied at the London School of Economics and the Worcester College, Oxford University, where he served as Director of Research for Martin Gilbert, the official biographer of Winston Churchill. From 1985 until his appointment as president of Hillsdale College in 2000, he was president of the Claremont Institute for the Study of Statesmanship and Political Philosophy. He is the author of Liberty and Learning, The Evolution of American Education, The Founder's Key, The Divine and Natural Connection Between the Declaration and the Constitution, and Churchill's Trial, Winston Churchill and the Salvation of Free Government, forthcoming. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here, and then when we come back, I'm going to be reading from Sun Stories. Thank you very much. I'm back, and I'm reading from Sun Stories: Tales from Around the World to illuminate the days and nights of our lives by Carolyn McVicker Edwards. Basically, she was compiled a bunch of stories from around the world, different tribal groups, and they all these stories have something to do with the sun. And this particular chapter I started last week. I read the introduction to it, and now we're going to read the actual story itself. And it's called How Shamash the Sun Rescued the Prince of Fertility. Here's the story of the first time Mot, Lord of the Drought, made Baal, Prince of the Rain, a prisoner in his underworld. It happened then, and it happens still. Long live Shapdash the sun, the queen of day, who carries him forth again and again to reign over earth as king of life. This is how it came to pass. Baal, the cloud rider, was celebrating his victory over Yam, the dragon of the sea. He had caused a new palace to be built for himself, magnificent enough for his newly won position as king of the world. For its wall, he had cut down cedars on 10,000 acres. For its adornments, 7 whole mountains had yielded their silver, gold, and jewels. He stood now in its splendid dining hall. A great feast had been laid on 707 golden tables. Before his guests arrived, he set his 2 magic axes on display, admiring their gleaming efficacy. Kothar, the heavenly smith, had made them. Driver and Repeller were their names. The gold of Driver, and the silver of Repeller glinted against the translucent violet blue of the lapis lazuli insets in the wall behind them. Baal swelled with pride. I have avenged the gods and goddesses of heaven against the sea monster Yam, Baal proclaimed to the vaults of the ceiling, smiting his chest with both fists. A feud of Baal the cloud rider and Yam the sea dragon was very old. They had battled continually over which of the two, rain god or ocean god, would be the lord of the earth. Finally, Father El himself, on the mountain at the far horizon, wrapped in the azure cloak of the sky, had to intervene. Baal still smarted at the memory of El's decision to allow Yam to rule the earth. But I showed him, yelled Baal to the echoing walls. I showed El who is king. Indeed, as Lord of the earth, Yam had proved so tyrannical in his demand for tribute from the gods and goddesses that they had re-instigated Baal's old war with the dragon of the sea. But Father El had commanded them to stop. Yam is more powerful, warned El. He will kill Baal, and I won't allow that. Baal's obedience had been grudging, but when the apple of Baal's eye, the long-necked, heavy-haired Astarte, had succeeded in charming Yam into inviting her to live with him under the sea in exchange for less tribute from all the other deities, Baal's rage had erupted. With the help of Driver and Repeller, Baal smote the scaly neck of the dragon Yam and left him for dead on the shore. And then Anat, Baal shook his head, thinking of his beautiful sister, without Anat. Anat, teeth even and white as a flock of goats on the side of a dusky mountain, had seen that Yam was not really dead. She had beaten his gluttonous coils mercilessly and kicked him back into the depths of the sea. Even now, Kothar the heavenly smith was fashioning a net for Yam, from which Baal was certain the sea dragon would never escape. So sure was Baal that he was free forever from Yam's spying and interferences that he had even allowed Kothar to make a giant window for his palace. Baal looked out of his new window. As the true king of the earth now, he could easily send through this window the snow, the rain, and the moisture in all the right seasons. Baal's tables were laden with the rarest of wines, the crispest of breads, the plumpest of quince and raisin cakes, and the most succulent of meats. By the time Baal's guests arrived, he had perfumed himself with myrrh and arrayed himself in robes of silver and white, belted and braceleted with grapevines. He wore narcissus flowers for his crown. Kothar the smith, decked in sprigs of pale blue-berried juniper, had a seat of honor at the great block of his anvil beneath Driver and Repeller, the magical weapons. Ashtar, the water boy, eyes shining, took Baal's hand. Could I touch Driver and Repeller, my lord? He asked reverently. Baal smiled kindly and stepped aside so the boy could get closer to the weapons. Baal's sister, Anat, in jeweled scarlet, the color of freshly peeled pomegranate seeds, kissed her brother's cheeks and squeezed his hand. This would not have been without you, Ball whispered. Shabash the sun arrived, enticing as wine in her sleeveless golden gown, the rays of her crown splashing the hall with warmth and light. On her finely muscled arms entered old Father L, dignified, cheeks ruddy, white hair flowing, and blue robes shining. Father L nodded and waved at the crowd. Astarte's black hair reached the floor, loose as raven wings and studded with diamonds. Astarte's hair alone was her gown. Ball took the hand of his beloved and reverently, as Ashtar, the water boy, had taken his own. When she sat down with Ball, the musicians began to play. 70 times 70, Ball called out in his loudest voice. Long may you rule, his guests shouted. Ball's wine slid silken down his throat. He looked contentedly at the company. But a draught suddenly chilled his back. No one seemed to notice, but a nagging and fearful thought slithered into his peace. In the midst of this plenty, these friends, this triumph, there intruded into Ball's mind the picture of one god whom he had not invited. Mott, drought-maker, king of the underworld, was not here. Yam, the sea-dragon, is gone, Ball told himself. I must not think of Mott. He does not deserve to come. He downed the chalice of wine. Laughter swirled amid the sounds of strings and drums. He reached for Astarte's hand. What is it, my love? Said Astarte, turning her face toward him, her lips full and hennied. Mott, said Ball. What? Mott. What about him, darling? Ball knitted his brow. Could Mott, at this very moment, he asked, be plotting to take my place as ruler of the earth? Send him a message, darling, said Astarte. Ashtar, she called to the water boy who sat near Kothar the smith. The deities relayed her call until Ashtar came to Astarte's side. Go, darling, to Mott, and take him this message from Baal. Ashtar's eyes widened. Tell him that Baal is supreme. Tell him that Baal will pay tribute to no one. Astarte smiled and then looked around at Baal. The corners of his beautiful mouth were flat. Go, she said to the water boy. She turned to the prince of fertility and touched his lips with her fingertips. Now dance with me, she said into his ear. All is well. But Baal gripped her wrist and shouted after the water boy, Ashtar! The boy stopped. Ashtar, Mott lives under the mountain with the twin peaks. Lift up the mountain and descend and take my message to Mott. But whatever you do, don't get too near his throne, or he will snatch you like a lamb between his jaws. Tell him I am king. The boy sped away, and Baal danced with Astarte in his arms. The party was over, and the dining hall empty of all but Baal, when Ashtar finally returned. Ashtar knelt amongst the clutter of plates, goblets, gnawed bones, and seeds sucked clean of their flesh. What is it, Ashtar? Asked Baal. What did Mott say? My lord, Mott is angry. He knew about your feast, my lord. He says that if you will not have him as your guest, he will have you. He says that you imagine he has mud and filth to feast on, but that he will heap upon you such fare as you have never tasted before. Baal again felt the chill on his back. The great hall was silent except for the sound of the boy's breathing and his own. I dare not go, he muttered. Mott will kill me if I go to his palace. The water boy raised his face. Oh no, my lord, you are king of the world, my lord. But Baal summoned messengers from the vineyard and the meadow. Flatter Mott and win his favor, he told them. Bring him the most lavish of your gifts, and tell him that I am his servant, his devoted slave. But Mott would not take Baal's gifts. He says, you are a coward, my lord, says the messenger of the vineyard. He says you try to insult him, and that you have no mettle. The messenger of the meadow nodded. He is very angry, my lord. He dares you to come to his table. Baal saw that he would have to confront his rival. He painted his face with red ochre as a charm against the forces of death. He rallied the clouds and the winds to carry 70 bushels of silver coins as gifts. He placed driver and repeller on the seat of his chariot. Baal heaved up the twin peaks of the mountain. Their soil stayed in his fingernails and streaked his face and robes. The clouds and the winds left the gifts of silver coins with the first legion of Mott's guards. Baal strapped driver and repeller to his waist and entered a maze of darkling steps that wound deep into the earth. It seemed that Mott's guards had known he was coming, for at each iron gateway they saluted respectfully. Baal grew surprisingly confident as he passed through each of the 7 gates. The guards' reception was reassuringly friendly. Even so, he was not prepared for Mott's apparent graciousness. "Ball," said Mott. His voice was warm and soothing, "you have come so far, you will want to bathe before you eat. I have drawn a bath for you." Indeed, steam curled from a long tub that crouched on birds' talons. The king of the underworld's smile was ghastly, and his body under his loose-hanging robes skeletal, except for his purplish eye sockets and the spots of red on his cheeks. Mott's face was white as lime. His lips were bloodless, and his teeth brown and sharp. But his look stirred in Ball more pity than fear, and he wanted to believe Mott's sincerity. "He's lonely," Ball thought smugly. "I should have come a long time ago. He's much easier to handle than I thought." As Ball's eyes grew accustomed to the dimness, he saw beside the tub an iron table, on which had been laid a sumptuous feast. He laid down his weapons and gratefully settled into the hot water. Soaking in the tub, he found himself enjoying a conversation with his enemy. The days of brooding about his fate slipped away, and his body relaxed by the time he had emerged from his bath and rested. He found himself ravenously hungry. Ball forgot that whoever eats of the food of the underworld may never more return to the world above. Mott's eyes glittered with approval as Ball heaped his plate. When Ball had tasted his first morsel, Mott threw back his head and laughed. "Now you are fully welcomed, my friend." Ball felt the sleep of death steal over him. Not even his misjudgment of Mott mattered to him now. At once, earth above began to languish. No rain fell, no green thing grew up. The clouds and the winds, waiting beside Ball's chariot, looked at each other uneasily. When the corn in the field before them shriveled on its stalks, they raced to the throne of Father El. Breathless and distraught, they fell before him. "Sire, Ball has sunk to the underworld. We wait for him, he does not return. The fields are dying, there is no rain." Old Father El started from his throne. "He has eaten of Mott's table. I know it," he rasped. The clouds and the winds lay limp before him. "We fear it is so, sire, we fear it so." Father El ripped away the shoulder of his azure robe. Down he came from his throne and strewed ashes upon his head. "Ball is dead." He raised his voice in lamentation. Down from his mountain he stumbled, over and over calling his mournful song in the fields and the valleys of earth. "Ball is dead. Ball is dead." "No!" screamed Anat, the sister of Ball, when she heard El's words. Like a ewe bereft of its lamb or cow its calf, she moaned. She tore her flesh and searched for her brother with a wild and frantic keening. Shaphash the son heard her cries. "What is it, Anat?" she asked kindly. "Lady's son," Anat said brokenly, "my brother is dead. He never came back from Mott, and I cannot even find his body for a funeral." Shaphash leaned closer. "Is Ball in the underworld?" Anat tensed, startled by the sudden hope. "Yes, my lady, Shaphash. You are the only one of the gods who can go and return from Mott's realm. Shaphash, my lady, will you go and look for Ball and bring him back to me?" Shaphash's face glowed with sympathy. "I will go, Anat. I will return with Ball's body." Shaphash left. Night plunged over the sorrowful Anat, weeping now in relief. Already no green thing grew, and while Shaphash searched for Ball, neither did the earth have light. Shaphash finally returned with Ball's body in her arms. The musicians of Ball's party now played dirges, and the gods and goddesses who had danced and feasted now rent their clothes and wept. Sadly, not knowing what else to do, they made Ashtar, the water boy, king of the land. Ashtar's head could not reach the top of Baal's throne, nor could his feet even touch its footstool. Anat found Mott strolling through the dead fields of earth. The Prince of Sterility did not even have time to cry out. With a roar of rage, she pushed him to the ground, ripped him into pieces with her sword, burned his flesh in fire, winnowed him with her breath, ground him in a mill, and sowed him into the earth. That night the gods and goddesses dreamed dreams of rivers running with honey, of clouds raining soft oil, of green plants bursting with milk. Baal woke from his death as from a sleep, and Shaphash took him up again, this time alive, in her arms. The lady's son carried Baal to his palace. Astarte kissed his throne, his brow, his ears, and his lips. Ashtar, the water boy, climbed down from Baal's throne. Anat washed her brother's feet, fed him, and perfumed his hair. Baal, Prince of Fertility, waxed strong again, and the gods and goddesses rejoiced. But deep in the earth where Anat had sown the pieces of his body, Mot also revived. Out of the earth Mot sprouted, rising again in his ancient form. Baal, he roared, come and fight. Long and fierce was the battle of the Prince of Death and the Prince of Life. They pranced like antelopes, gored like bulls, charged like stallions, and stung like asps. Now Mot triumphed. Now Baal. At the height of their fury, Shamash the sun raised her voice. Mot, she cried out. The Prince of Death lay gasping on the ground. Mot, leave Baal to the underworld and return to your own abode, ordered Sun. The time has come for life. Go, Mot, or every god and goddess will pluck up the foundations of your house and break your scepter. The light from the sun blinded Mot. Baal stood panting, while Mot, covering his eyes, rose and conceded the fight. Let Baal be king, said Mot, and turned away. Baal fell on his face before Shamash the sun. I am your servant, said the king of the rain. Shamash the sun smiled. Warmed and strengthened, Baal raised himself up and walked, his step increasingly light, away to his palace. There he would send through his great window the snow, the rain, and the moisture in every right season. And that concludes this particular sun story called How Shamash the Sun Rescued the Prince of Fertility. And I believe that was from the Canaan tribe. Let's find out. Mother, son. Let's see here. Yes, from ancient Canaan, Canaan. So, now the next one for next week is Spider Grandmother Finds Light for Her People. And it's from the Kiowa Nation, Great Plains, North America. So, at this time, we find ourselves at the end of another episode of Story Time. And until next time, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.